You made it. Oh, good.
Hey, welcome.
Excuse me. Let's see if we can. How did that go? It went very well, except for I initially ended up with why they're taking so long, and there is it's in between sessions. Side by side sessions.
Oh, right.
So it's like I'm sitting there like 3 minutes late. Because they still, and I realized that. Then I ran to my room, which was full of people, started it.
Yeah.
And then it couldn't.
Oh, no.
So I had like 15 people who sheets with 100 lost.
We,
Have you already distributed the worksheets?
yeah, but they've been instructed not to pass them until.
That's what I didn't put to, which is that's the last stuff.
Yes, trusted people, Brad and Sanjay.
Brad, did you bring it up for everyone? Okay.
No, but minutes. Maybe Matt? Matt? He'll never come back. Matt?
That's by design.
He's ignoring me. Matt Miller? Minutes? Adds a third M to his name. You are a gentleman. Jabber? We got in trouble not doing Jabber last time.
That's true, we did get Adam, can you channel, can you get Jabber? Sure. Scrap channel.
Thanks.
And did we have one Brian remote, Julian? Yes, we did.
Great.
Do I have my own mic or?
Hi, this is Murray from Dispatch, and before you guys get started, my spy network advises me that you want to kick my ass to take over Helium. Bring it. This is Canada, you can ask nicely and we'll just give it to you.
You want me to kick it off? You want to do it? I did it yesterday. Can you? So, we're definitely need to start. It is just after the start time. This is HTTP. If you're not here for the HTTP working group, you're in the wrong room. We have an agenda today. 2 things, major things on the agenda. So first of all, note well. Note well. If you haven't seen this already, you can find it by searching for IETF Note Well. These are the terms under which we participate here, and they're important regarding things like your behavior and intellectual property. So if you're not aware of this, please do read it because you are bound by these guidelines. Are they guidelines or rules? Anyway, best practices, I guess. There you go. Codes. Today, we have a scribe, Matt Miller. Thank you very much. The blue sheets can now be circulated. Thank you very much. We have a Jabber relay. Thank you very much. So today, all we're going to do is first we're going to talk about Quick and HTTP. Was that first on the? Yes. First on the agenda, so an update from the Quick world about what they're doing, and then we're going to dig into the HTTP core issues. Any agenda bashing? Mike, why don't you make your way up?
I want to make sure I wasn't going to do that for that one.
We have a clicker again.
Okay.
Do you want to try?
Sure.
I will turn. It's on.
Okay. All right. So now 2 out of 3 on the clicker working for me. Okay. So, not quite lining up with. Okay. So, HTTP over Quick is a product of the Quick working group, not the HTTP working group, through interesting machinations of the IETF. And the Quick working group is chartered to describe mappings between HTTP mumble semantics using Quick and accommodate HTTP2 extension mechanisms in HTTP over Quick. So in the process of doing that, we have adopted some changes to how HTTP is mapped that might be beneficial in the HTTP2 world as well. And we've also kicked some things out as that's HTTP-BIS's job, not ours. So I'm here to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So first off, HTTP2 uses this nice little implicitly closed, also called zombie stream thing to build its priority tree, where you just skip a stream number. The spec says that's implicitly closed, and then some people will use that to build their priority tree and hope that the server doesn't actually clean up those particular streams that they've skipped as the placeholders in their tree. But servers don't technically know which closed streams are safe to clean up and which ones aren't. So clients have to make some assumptions, and servers have to make some assumptions about which ones they can scavenge. And it can lead to the priority tree being inconsistent between clients and servers. It's a little bit of a pain. It should be over quick. In addition to not wanting to deal with that, it doesn't have implicit stream closure, which would mean we would have to actually send a fin on the empty stream, get a fin back from the server, and then know that it was closed. But you still don't know if it's a placeholder or not unless you just assume that streams the client didn't use are always placeholders. So it should be over quick introduces the explicit idea of a placeholder. There is a setting in the settings frame that says how many placeholders the client is allowed to use. And the priority frame just says what I'm prioritizing and what I'm declaring a dependency on with a request, a push, a placeholder, or the root of a tree. We can't just do 0 being the root of the tree anymore because stream 0 is a valid request stream. Yay! So this does allow for more aggressive pruning, and it allows for agreement on what is actually going to get pruned and what's going to get retained. So as an example, let's say you have 3 streams that have gone inactive. The stream's been closed more than an RTT ago, and 2 active ones that are down below. Anytime the server wants to, it can make a pass and clean up any branches that have only inactive nodes on them. And it can then clean up any interior regions that have only inactive nodes and just pass the priority and the weight appropriately down. Yeah. And the result of that is you can clean up the nodes that are not placeholders because you know which ones are and which ones aren't. Now, that's great for HTTP over quick. The problem is, what do we want to do in H2? We can just say this has not been a crippling problem so far, and we're not going to touch it. We'll just let quick be different. We can say that sounds good. We'll take it up as an extension. We can do that. There are a few things that have to be a little bit different to fit into H2, notably that the priority frame is not quite the same now. We could choose to take as a working group item. We need to do something better than we have, but not that. Or we can just take our time and do something better long after HTTP over quick has shipped and hope it goes into HTTP over quick 2 if there is one. Quick 3. Okay.
So if folks have comments, they can come forward. I have a comment as an individual, and I would go to the floor mic, but there's a giant TV in my way. Yeah, it is really nice. So I'm a big fan of this, like in the quick scheme. I think this does a nice job of preserving most of the flexibility that we've had while reining in the state problems and the other issues about sides not being sure of what the state on the other side is, as well as the overall requirements. I view quick as H3 in most ways. I don't ever feel the need to backport every feature unless there's a critical or urgent need, right? And so my implementer hat would be world.
But to be clear, you said to you, quick is H3. Correct.
So, Patrick, do you then imply that you don't expect to ever define another version of HTTP over TCP? Or any changes to it?
Yeah, never is a long time, but I mean, it would be a logical successor to to HQ. So I shouldn't have said quick. I really mean HQ is HTTP3 in my mind, and I would presume it would be in that model going forward, but I don't think there's anything about what I said that requires that to be true.
Okay.
I'll insert myself in queue and also avoid the TV, personally. I think I agree with Patrick. I think the only place where this really matters is when it affects someone's implementation, not the implementation, but someone using the protocol. So if this were surfaced in an API somewhere, either on the server side or the client side, the more different abstractions we have where they're incompatible, the more it causes angst. And on the client side, I think it's pretty much a clean slate so far. On the server side, I'd look to the server implementers to complain now if they were going to.
Gabriel Montenegro. I guess, in principle, anything that could help simplify this priority scheme in H2 would be very welcome. If this helps rein in the state explosion problem, sure. But I'm intrigued by Patrick's comment. So we get clarification of Patrick's. I'm wondering, we have a regular session going on, and the fallback position is always there, actually per charter. So we may end up with H2 when we think we're going to for quick, or we're capable of quick, minus with H2. Are you implying that even in that situation, we're talking H2 over TCP, we might still be able to take advantage of this without any extra signaling, or what did you imply?
No, in this scenario, you fall back to H2, you speak H2. But I think that's, dead stop. So Mike's asking, do we want, an H2 extension here, which we can add, right? So do you want to fall back to H2 and speak a new extension with a new set of priorities, right? Is that amount of machinery worthwhile on a protocol that, we expect to be substantially replaced by HQ, right?
Okay,
And
that's a fair question.
To me, that seems like a whole lot of backboard effort into a whole really different ecosystem for, hopefully diminishing returns as time goes on, right?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I guess I might still be interested in seeing, how complex the extension and working it out would be. And if it's a little bit more than, I would say, let's just
So I would ask
H3
Mike,
and forget about it. Yeah.
I would ask Mike this question, is like, if we were interested in doing this as an extension in H2, is that something that should be decided coincident with the HQ decisions, or is that something we can just sort of tackle independently?
I think we can tackle it independently. The real question that has to be decided coincident is, do we want to try and do something better than this and recommend it to Quick? And if the answer to that is no, then we have plenty of time to figure out what to do with H2. Yes.
Yep.
Jana Ingot. I was going to actually propose what you just said at the end, which is maybe what you proposed. Number one, just leave HTTP Quick do what it's doing, but also use this as a signal that priorities needs fixing in H2, and that doesn't need to be done urgently, doesn't need to be done in time for Quick, but it is something that I hope would happen in this community separately. And if it turns into something that's better even for Quick, then we can go retrofit it back into Quick.
Yeah,
later.
that's effectively the fourth one.
Yeah.
Is it all right?
As a whole good, well, even though we don't have API, we don't provide API for changing the priorities, we provide logging capabilities, logging that priority tree. So having a different priority tree means that the processing of the log becomes more complicated. So I might prefer leave the priorities alone, unless it is proved to improve performance.
Okay. So we'll see how see how this works in Quick, and then make a decision later.
Eric Kinnear, Apple. As someone tasked with providing APIs that allow people to express stuff, I think with priorities, it's not that big of a difference. And here personally, I would be perfectly content to leave things alone and deal with it later. But as we start talking kind of about the future and where things diverge further, if it diverges a lot, that starts to become a little more tricky. So I do have an interest in making sure that things from a expression side at the API layers are at least equivalent enough to make that common.
I'll just insert that I think one of the factors here in terms of us coming up with something better in this community is that because of the overlap in the communities, this is going to be gated on the availability of implementers to put effort into something better. And right now, they're all very busy, especially on the client side, which is where we really need it. So I'm not surprised that we have this. So I've got Roy and then Adam.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, I don't like it when working.
Roy, your audio is breaking up. Can you turn your video off?
I'd love to, can't. I have no idea how to do that.
And maybe get closer to your microphone if you can.
What I was going to say is that I don't like it when the working group decides not to do something based upon a title. If the real question is someone out there willing to write a specification of improvements to H2 priorities? And if there isn't anyone, then, well, it should just sit there as an open concept.
So this actually started out as a draft proposing an extension, and then it got pulled into Quick because it solved the problem we had there, but the HTTP draft is still there. It may or may not be expired, I'm not sure.
I have a question from Lucas Pardue in the Java room asking how this relates to priority hints work in the WICG.
No idea.
Okay. I also want to mention while I'm up here, there is some comment in the Java room that it's still pretty quiet for remote participants. So for people coming up to talk on the floor, please come very close to the microphone.
I will make a comment to that. It's important to remember the WICG is just effectively a playground. It has very little status in W3C process. So for whatever weight that deserves.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, that work does not know its relationship to this.
Yes, that's true too, yeah.
If anything, that work is looking for cues from us, right? So.
Okay, so I think the answer is right now we will do nothing. I may poke the draft to the mailing list if folks want to take a look at it, but the plan is not to move forward with it right now. Okay.
I got you.
Yeah, so next item being referred over, the Quick Working Group's charter is to make sure that the HTTP2 extension mechanisms are present in HTTP over Quick. They've made the decision that they are not going to port over all existing extensions, which means alt service and origin, which currently define extension frames for H2, which certainly have value in HTTP over Quick as well. It would be on this working group to adopt a draft that defines what that looks like and registers it with the HTTP over Quick registry. I have written the draft for alt service. It is dead simple and super short. I don't think anyone has done origin yet, but we certainly could. This is just if you feel like writing a draft where most of the work has already been done for you, this is a good opportunity to get your name on an RFC. And lastly, I think it's last, HTTP over Quick has decided that along the same principles as TLS greasing a lot of the code points and Quick greasing a lot of the public pieces, anywhere where a value should be ignored if not unknown, it defines a couple of frame types, a couple of settings values, and says, if you see these had no semantic value whatsoever, you don't understand them, keep moving. And I understand that recently an implementation was encountered which did not tolerate an unknown setting type. So this would be something that we could also bring into H2 to help exercise peers like that and force them to validate their code. If we're interested in reserving the code points for HTTP2 as well, yay, it's quick IANA registration in the draft.
So Martin Thompson, I think we should do this at least so that we maintain some semblance of similarity with the quick stuff. Also because, yes, people have managed to mess this up already. Don't know how, but that's sad state of the world, I'm afraid.
So
It's broken.
can I ask, is any implementation willing to start sending greased values? To actually start actively greasing?
That's the
those
right
points?
question to ask, yes.
Yeah. Because if so, then I think that's a good discussion to have. By the way, you're at the mic. Oh, wait, Patrick's.
Patrick needs to make that decision.
Right. So certainly on some of our testing channels to at first not so much in Greece, but almost a survey like what this looks like to see what our connection rates are. And then, based on that data, plausibly, right?
Yeah. I think we want to be careful now that we know that people are actually falling over when this happens.
Sure. But right now?
Just in case people aren't aware.
So, I think the driver that brought this, many things brought it to a head for TLS 1.3 and for Quick when sort of the strategy was really, innovated. And it's been great initiating those things during development, and H2 didn't have this philosophy, right? So this is really whether we're considering can you backport grease, and if your joint is already rusted, the grease isn't going to help if you slap it on the top, right? That's kind of what we're concerned about. So my draft that identified how to do connect tunnels in H2 for bootstrapping WebSockets was deployed by a very major server, and in that draft you set out a settings from the server side towards the peer, and it turned out a fairly commonly deployed open source implementation. Upon receiving the settings value, close the connection. Right. Not good. They updated the code, but you have almost immediately. But of course, you have the issue of making those updates in the field, and so that's sort of driving this as a motivator. So if there are other people who would be willing to jump into the breach with me to test these greasing points, that always makes it a lot easier if you're not the only one who's willing to sacrifice some connections for the purpose of data gathering. So that'd be great if you could approach me.
And it sounds like, since you have client covered, the initial issue that we found was on a client, which means we need some servers to do this as well.
So to be clear, you are going to deploy an experiment?
I can do something in an experimental channel for sure.
So any other clients or especially servers who would be interested in trying to run a similar experiment? We don't have to get in it. Oh, okay, cool. So maybe let's wait to hear back from you folks on the list to make sure it's something sane to do, and then if so, we can write a draft and do the right things in the registries and so forth. Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mike. So next up, we have an editor's overview of what's happening in HTTP core. Julian, are you with us? And if so, could you get into the queue? Yeah, that's why we call it core.
Yeah, it is now officially HTTP core, so these are just bugs in the slides you can report.
Hello.
Okay, let's stay on topic.
That's why it's core.
Julian, go ahead.
So this is just a quick summary of where we are with the core drafts. Next slide. So we have submitted new drafts early July before the deadline. We are now at 3 drafts. Next slide. I started looking at the RFC errata. We have 27 left, which have, there are actually 27 which are not rejected. 13 of which verified, 9 held for document update, 5 reported. Of these 27, we have already addressed 18, 9 are still open. All of them have been, for all of these, we have opened GitHub issues, and we have got a summary page. Maybe you want to open that one, maybe not. So that just gives you a mapping of the errata IDs to the GitHub issue numbers and how we resolved them if we already did. Next slide. GitHub issues, we've got quite a lot, 122, 79 are open. Mark has labeled a subset of these for discussion today. Next slide. Okay, and this is a bit that I wanted to get feedback on. Some of the Sony issues that we had in the errata are actually bugs in the HTTP ABNF. So I really think to get things addressed properly, we want to have test cases and a test suite. And if somebody can supply RFC 5234 compliant ABNF driven parser, that would be great. Otherwise, we'll have to figure something out. One other thing I was thinking about is that we currently throw everything into a single collected ABNF, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense because parsing messages is really different from parsing the contents of a field value. So I was planning to rearrange that and to label the ABNF fragments that we have to be in two different buckets, essentially. I probably should open a ticket for that for further discussion. And that's all I have before we go into the individual tickets for discussion.
I think we should move on to the issues. Yeah.
Yeah, there's another slide. Right now the spec is essentially silent on HTTP2 and QPAC and Quick HTTP and BCP 56BIS, and maybe there's also a relation to the revision of the cookie spec, which, as I understand, might get finished this year, but it doesn't seem it gets finished before us. So maybe we also need to coordinate with MyQuest that that spec actually will build on top of the new core specs. So the relationship to these other specs that have something to do with HTTP, we should discuss at some point of time.
So, Julian, I have an open issue in BCP 56BIS to reference the new documents, and I think we're going to keep it open from the discussion the other day. I think maybe what we could do is go through the cookies doc and give Mike and John some issues if we see anything where there's a mismatch or a reference.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about Quick. I guess when we started this work, the idea was that if these were done in time, Quick would reference them.
So HTTP, Mike Bishop, HTTP over Quick has at least one instance where really the text that we want to reference is not in the old RFCs. Okay. So it has a reference to the old RFCs with an editorial issue open that if we can reference the new ones, we should.
I think it's still a realistic possibility that we can get this done in time for Quick to be able to reference it. So, while you're here, Julian, is it worth going over the reorganization and its status?
How we got from 7 to 3 drafts?
Yes. And especially whether it's worth people reviewing that again.
Yeah, maybe Roy wants to say something about that.
Right?
Do I want to say anything about that? I'm not sure. So to produce these drafts, we
Roy, you're breaking up. You've
Yeah,
turned your
the
video off, right?
already. I switched to a different mic.
Oh, that's better.
The meat echo is just bad today. It was fine yesterday. Okay.
You sound fine now. Go ahead.
Let's see. So we set up the HTTP core drafts to protect all the history from the last the whole set of authoring over time, basically. So if you go into the GitHub location, you can actually see every commit that's been made over the past almost 15 years. Thanks, Julian. There are a set of diffs available in the on the website for the HTTP core. There are a lot of changes that we go through, but for the most part, they've just been changes to how the tools do hyphenation, which is really annoying. And other than
Roy?
Ping.
No, he left. Roy, can you rejoin the queue?
So while I wait for Roy, I will express my appreciation. This reorganization that has happened by itself has actually, I think, significant help to readability, and it's obviously a pile of work. So thanks to Mark and Julian and Roy for doing that. Roy, you're back on.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, going through every change is not going to work with this connection. So I suggest that we go through the issues lists that are open and see if anyone has comments on issues.
Yeah. I think mostly what I wanted to do there is highlight to folks to make sure they understood that the reorg had happened and that it's relatively stable, although I think in our discussions we've said we know that we still have some text to write and fill in some places and some connections to make and so forth. But I think the overall structure is relatively solid, although we might tweak it as we go along. Do you see that's accurate, Roy?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so if you go to, go back and just go to one of the open issues links if you want, or yeah, go in there. A little higher. You really should join GitHub today. And then it labels, or just hit that discuss one, that'll get them all. So we've highlighted a bunch of issues that we felt like it'd be nice to get some input from the broader group to help us move forward. So let's go through those. Julian? I'm just going to go through them in the order of the issues list. So issue 123, Julian, includes status 422.
So this is, can you hear me? I guess so.
Yes.
So this is a very frequently asked question on Stack Overflow. What's the right status code to return when I can pass the request, but the contents doesn't make sense to me, like missing XML elements or bad JSON structure or whatever, because people want something more specific than 400. And WebDAV really made a very generic definition of that, and it is really widely used outside WebDAV. And the one thing that seems to keep a few people from actually using is the argument that is in the WebDAV spec. So I think that's one paragraph status code definition that we should actually pull into the core draft, core specs.
So this is Mark speaking personally. I think it's a good idea. It's a generic status code, so it belongs in the core. I think when we have that kind of situation, it's probably good to port it over. I assume we'd update the other spec, right?
Well, we update the IANA registry, right? That's why we have it for status codes.
Right. But would we list 4918 as being updated by the new spec?
Not necessarily unless we actually change the definition, right? But I guess the
We're just changing those
IETF has
terms.
an opinion on it.
Okay. I don't have strong feelings, I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
So Chair Hatbecker, and does anybody else have opinions?
Martin Thompson, yep, include it, but don't bother updating it. If you're not changing the definition, and I don't think there's any need to do that, you're just listing it. This exists.
Yeah. No, and Chair had on, I think, sort of the point of sort of these restatements is to incorporate the base elements in the base document. So that's totally appropriate.
I think we should be also willing to kick things out if they're not used.
We have a few issues like that, so
Yeah.
maybe we'll get to that. That's probably a slightly different discussion.
It's a little bit more difficult because you're actually looking to obsolete 72, 30, whatever's. So
Yeah, I think that's on the edge of in scope and it's more of a consensus question, whereas I think it's pretty clear that if stuff just needs to be incorporated to understand base HTTP, it should be there.
Less controversial. Okay, I'm going to record the sense of what we discussed in the room and the issues just for convenience. Next up, on number 74. Our headers are always defined with A, B, and F. And so when we were discussing structured headers, this came up, where 7230 says the sender must not generate multiple header fields with the same field name in a message unless either the entire field value for that header field is defined as a comma-separated list, i.e. using the special octothorpe-based syntax that we come up with in section 7, or the header field value is a well-known exception as noted below, which means basically cookies. And depending on how you read this, it can mean a couple of different things. You know, do we require headers to be defined using A, B, and F? Because we're tying semantics to how a header is defined now, or at least handling of the header. Also, you know, it ties the handling of specific syntax handling. So in other words, when you look at that A, B, and F, it tells you how to combine two headers, how white space is handled, you know, empty header fields, that sort of thing, and how you canonicalize those effectively. And that's tied again to that octothorpe rule. So, you know, if we can define headers without using A, B, and F, the question is, are those requirements, are those behaviors still required when you're combining headers, or is that specific to headers defined using that syntax? And this becomes important for structured headers because, you know, they're defined primarily, you know, their normative definition is with a bunch of algorithms. And so we talked through this in the issue. And I think I made a proposal down here, which is replace that text with the sender must not generate multiple header fields with the same field name in a message unless that field's definition allows this. For example, it uses the comma-separated list in ABF, the octothorpe values, where the header is one exception. So that would clarify that you know, we're not doing this just based on how you define the syntax of the header, which to me always seemed a bit odd. Anybody have any comments on this? Julian, you're oh, Julian, you're already speaking, I think. Do you have something to say? Or anyone else, of course.
I just recalled that we actually have a slightly related issue to that, which I opened when we did alt service, where we actually have list syntax, but the whole header field is not really defined as a list production because we have a special, I think, clear parameter. So we already have a different ticket which is slightly related to this.
Do you remember the ticket number?
I'm looking.
And Julian, did you have any feelings about this proposal?
So I think the important bit is we can decouple the recombination rules from the actual A, B, and F syntax, but I don't think that we have the freedom to change the recombination rules. So a language that allows new header fields to be defined without using the list production literally, that's fine. But if that affects the way how components can recombine header fields, I don't see how we can do that. And that's the discussion that we had in conjunction with structured headers, right?
Right.
So the issue is number 7 that I just...
Number 7?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So this is a case where we have defined a header field to be either a list or essentially a keyword that can only occur once. So if you take the call spec literally, that's not a candidate for recombination, right? Because the field value is not defined as a list.
Right. Well, no, it's a little more subtle than that, I think. The requirement back in issue 74 that one refers to is about sender behavior. It's only saying when it can generate multiple header fields. It doesn't place any requirement on when a recipient can or cannot combine headers, because to do so would require a recipient to understand the syntax of every possible header field. And so that becomes a deployment problem. But the implicit requirement, which maybe we need to be explicit, is that when a recipient receives 2 instances of any header field, no matter what it is, it can always combine them.
Yeah.
And header fields should be defined in such a way that they're robust in the face of that. And now Roy has something to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe we should just simply make the requirement of
Again, Roy, maybe just 15 seconds will make it work better. Slow start from me, Echo, perhaps. Give it another shot.
Yeah, can you hear me yet?
Yeah, that's the trick.
The thing is, maybe we should change it to be that the sender is not generated unless it's known that recombining the header field, recombining those header fields using commas does not change the semantics. So if we just explicitly say what is the condition that we want to ensure doesn't fail.
I think I can live with that. What do you think about the other thing, making it explicit that the recipient can combine anything when they have multiple instances? Just because I've seen people misunderstanding this time and time again.
Yeah, I mean, we could work out the details.
Right. So with this issue and the rest of the title today, I'm looking for signs that like this elucidation is going to help the rest of the working group, contribute meaningfully. And if it's not, then we should probably just, take it back to the editorial team, right?
Well, from my perspective, we want to make sure we consult with the working group, and it's not just us. And we also need feedback.
No, I'm looking to assess that on an issue-by-issue basis. So, yeah.
So, Martin Thompson, my experience with things that do this sort of coalescing is that they do it blindly.
Yeah, I don't think that's been disputed by anyone.
Yeah, so being explicit about that would really help.
So, Roy, could you repeat what you said before, just so I can capture it?
Am I still on? Yeah. So we could, instead of defining that in terms of the field's definition, define it in terms of how the field is interpreted when it's recombined, when it's combined into commas. So it's just a slightly different expression of the same thing. Personally, I think this is purely editorial.
Okay.
Shall we move on to 61? Is that what we want to tackle next? I will introduce 61 well-marked types. Anna says that it's my understanding that IETF recommends exclusive use of UTF-8. It seems therefore that except charset can go. Browsers already do this and Fetch requires it for what it's worth.
And then we went into a bit of a discussion of what it means to go. And I think if we go down far enough, I gave a comment. I think what's on the table is putting some pros in exploring the downsides of using except care set and changing the header status in the registry to obsoleted. Which is a status that the registry already uses.
So is this specifically about fingerprinting surface, or is this just about the functionality is not desired?
All of the above?
Yeah, so my understanding is that no one effectively uses this, and those that attempt to find that they get results that they might not want. Asking for something and then getting it, you might not actually get what you thought you wanted. And it's not very clear what you're getting, particularly since media types often don't signal character sets very clearly.
Right. So I think that's a good bar for when we're asking this generic question of what to throw out. So it's not that this just isn't widely implemented, it's that this gives bad and harmful results, right? And so I think that's in my mind, that's a good place to draw the line.
So I think this is not a case of throwing it out of the document. We would retain the description of the header field, maybe abbreviated in the sense that this one existed for the purposes of negotiating character sets, but it turns out it's not a good idea, and we're obsoleting it as a result. I think that's a reasonable thing to do.
I certainly think that's appropriate. What would you have to do to get thrown out of the document?
Basically not exist, I think, at this point, because if we take something out that was registered in the past, people will ask questions, and I think at least leaving a tombstone there is responsible.
We've done that in the past with, for example, the payment required status code.
Right.
Yes.
I agree that we should actually have explicit text in the spec saying it's no longer recommended, and this is why. I don't think any other mechanism works.
Okay.
So you can certainly truncate the description of semantics in that process, but sure. Yeah.
Would anyone like to speak for or against obsolation? All right, charset is dead.
Except
Fair set. Fair play. Charset's okay. Negotiating charset, this is not okay. 52?
So this is a reuse of responses. And I'll just read out the issue. The specification of cache control in no store on the response side can be read to allow the response to be reused for another concurrent request since it's specified in terms of non-volatile memory. Likewise, other cache directors are silent on such reuse. So this is so-called, it's very common now for at least for intermediary caches, maybe not on the browser cache side, but it's called request collapsed or collapsing or collapsed forwarding. There are a bunch of names for it. It's become quite common. Clarification as to whether such reuse for temporary concurrent requests would be helpful, especially for no store. I expect for other cache control possibly too. This came up, I was a little surprised when I heard someone read it this way, because in my mind, in all the discussions we've had previously in the working group, the rough semantics of no store are that this bypasses the cache completely. It's like you're routing around the cache. And so to think that you could reuse it for multiple requests is a little surprising. So I just thought it'd be good to clarify that one way or the other. And just to read why you can read this into it, I'll read the definition of no store. The no store response directive indicates the cache must not store any part of either the immediate request or response. This directive applies to both private and shared caches. Must not store in this context means that the cache must not intentionally store the information in non-volatile storage and must make a best effort attempt to remove the information from volatile storage as promptly as possible after forwarding it. But of course, if you get concurrent requests, that is not spoken to.
Yeah. Thompson Jeffrey also points out here that the preload and prefetch stuff that browsers do probably play into this pretty well, and I'm going to add to the pile server push. And the way that we think about that probably needs a little bit more work.
Yeah, so server push, I was going to add, so we might introduce the concept of single-use resources, right, which is what we mean in a lot of these cases. So the other way the browser uses these, and I think it may have had to do with the original no-store language a little bit, no stores are stored like in memory, so you can go like the forward and back buttons in the browser, right, and not lose those images. But it's not for reuse of like.
So we have a different section in the caching spec, which I'm really glad it's still in there now, although we talked about taking it out before, which is the relationship of caching to a history list. And it kind of has a carve out for that explicitly caching and history lists are separate things. So I think we're okay there. That's effectively a separate cache. But I do like your idea of, carving out an explicit concept of a single-use response and attaching that in the appropriate places in the caching spec. Does that seem reasonable to folks?
Martin Thompson, I just got the creeps again. Maybe this, we need to decide which one of these things no store is. And then we have some separate work to do on a new directive to fill the other need. Because there's this notion of collapsing. Do we want it collapsed or not? That's a new directive, isn't it?
No, I don't think so, no. It's done today a lot. A lot.
The collapsing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a new notion, which is please don't collapse this thing.
No, I'm talking about whether no store is an opt-out from collapsing or not. And right now, as far as I'm aware, in all the implementations, it is.
It is an opt-out.
I believe so, implicitly. I would like to make that explicit if we want to be crisp about it.
So your definition of request collapsing, just to be clear, two concurrent requests for the same URI, one blocks on the other, the assumption that it can be reused, right? So the browsers do that as well. And they also, no store would be treated as single use if that happens.
Is that no store on the request or no store on the response?
Response.
And
no store is no request.
So I've been waiting patiently for that guy to get his response, and now I have to make my own. Right. That's kind of awful, but yeah, I guess that's something we'd have to explore.
Right. So like our browser sometimes collapses and sometimes doesn't. It does in the general case, but out of like XHR, it does not, because it kind of assumes that it won't be able to collapse those. So yeah, that can be very contextual.
My inclination here is that what we need to do is acknowledge that where collapsing exists in the caching spec, and then make no store a carve out from it. And then once that sits and we're comfortable with that, we can look at the rest and make sure that there aren't any other places where we might need a carve out or another directive or whatever. But that's probably the starting point.
As Chris from Comcast, yes, clarity on this is going to be super useful. Whether it is or isn't allowed, one answer is going to be of use.
And just for fun, I would note, if you don't request collapse run favicon.ico, the internet will collapse.
I bet. Okay.
And from a CDN's perspective, when we see multiple requests come in at the same time, we tend to treat those as though they were, if they're really close together, we figure we're gonna, it's just like they were the same request. And so if we really do want it to be separate, we should be specific about that, because I actually would have assumed the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm. I think that the 1 second resolution of the HTTP caching model kind of might lead you towards that conclusion. Yeah, that's understandable. Yeah. And I say that I think that the default should be a carve out for no store, mostly because I strongly suspect that most content folks would be incredibly surprised if the answer was anything else. And very unpleasantly, like with security consequences.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comment? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and record that on the issue then. Next up is 415 and accept number 48. So Martin raised this issue. This came up in ACME where they wanted to use 415 and accept. 7694, which I believe is CICE, Julian's spec to do kind of a reverse negotiation for content encoding, I would say. Yeah. So the idea here is that if you could have accept in a response when you're using 415, that would be helpful. So this would be an expansion of the scope of use of an existing header, just like we did in CICE, but it would be in core.
Yeah. So we've created this special carve-out so that you could say gzip a request body, but we never really got down to the media type negotiation, which surprising. I'm kind of surprised because that would have been the first thing to do, I would have thought, but turns out no. So.
The only objection that comes to me for this is that people are used to accept dash being in request headers, but we've kind of already broken that taboo with CICE.
Right.
So,
just as a matter of consistency, accept char set.
Well, not anymore. Does anybody have a concern about doing this? Roy? Anybody?
I guess the question is, what is this? Because this sounds like a request to extend RFC 7694, not the core specs. So we've got a related issue 119, which would be about forwarding 7694 into the core specs.
That was 119?
119.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Go out of this. That's right. So would the proposal for 119, proposed resolution 119 be to just incorporate obsolete 7694 by incorporating it into core?
Right, that would be the question.
Yeah, that was my sort of assumption here, is that it would be a good, because it's such a small thing and because it affects the meaning of those header fields pretty fundamentally. It would make sense to roll that entire thing in. It would be, what, an extra paragraph in the definition of each thing at most?
Yeah, this is kind of the first conversation we had, where we've got scattered proposed standards that impact core. Let's just roll them together to make life much better.
Especially when we can remove pages of boilerplate and oblique references and
That RFC is huge relative to what it actually does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so anybody have a concern about, first of all, does anybody have a concern about rolling 7694 into core? Okay. And then the second question is back to number 48. Do we want to expand the scope of 7694, which is now going to be in core, to include the accept header using the same kind of pattern? And I think we like that from what I heard.
I'm not seeing a lot of interest in that issue. Do people understand what's being asked? Because it's a fairly substantive change. I don't want to take sort of silence as...
Sorry, I'm actually up here to go back one topic. Roy responded in the Jabber chat room, +1 to incorporate the standard meanings of the same fields all in one place.
With respect to putting accept on the server side, do people, anyone else have an opinion? Okay.
Just speaking personally, I don't have a strong opinion. I don't personally have an immediate use case for this, but Acme found one for it, which is kind of indicative. And I think I have a suspicion the HTTP API folks would be interested in this from time to time, for the same reasons Acme found.
Yeah, and the notion of 415 and accepting the asymmetry that came up during DOE as well. We kind of worked around it, but I guess I would favor.
Can I suggest just in the issue right now, record that we discussed it and there was some support in the room, but let's see how the list feels about it and go from there. Okay. Next up is, number 46. So star in accept in all the different accept headers, which does not include care set anymore. Excuse me. This may be too aggressive for core, but I wanted to get a sense of what people thought. Just observing that people tend to use the star value in the accept headers a lot, and often it's not terribly helpful to have it in there at all. And I was wondering if we could have some advisory text around it, or carve some of it off completely, or discourage use, or something. Because if the Q value of your star value is higher than any other value, the semantics are basically send anything in preference to something specific, which isn't useful. I don't know of any practical use case for that. I'd love to hear if somebody has one. If the Q value for the star value is lower than another media type, for example, another value, then it says send a more specific value in preference to something else, but the default semantics of the accept headers are already the case that you can send anything you want because it's an optional to support header. You can ignore the header, and that means you can send anything. And if you give a Q value of 0, it says don't send any other value except the one that I asked for. But again, it's an optional header. You can ignore it and send whatever you want. So that doesn't really make sense. And in media type specifically, text/star, I personally feel like there's a lot of cargo protocol design going on here. I don't think it actually gives the server information that's practically useful. I see browsers sending a lot of star this and star that. I don't know of practical use cases for that. I'd love to hear if people have them. And Voyager, I think, might have feelings about this.
Actually, I've seen people ask for /+JSON and stuff like that. So to extend the media range ABNF to allow the typed media type format. So send me anything that is JSON, or send me anything that is XML.
I agree that that's interesting. I'm not sure we can do that, but it'd be interesting. Yeah, globbing. Well, that's indeed. Well, again, if I have 5 specific media types that are all JSON based, of what and they all have different semantics. Of what I guess if you have version 1 has one name plus JSON and version 2 has, but still you wouldn't do star. You'd ask for them both by name. So I'm still not sure what the utility is here.
I guess it could be interesting if you have, as you should, multiple media types for different things in your REST API, and also have support for both JSON and something else in your API. So the client could say, I want the JSON variant of all the responses that you can produce. Now you will say there should be only one format anyway, so one syntax. So I was just saying that this has been asked quite a few times on Stack Overflow, whether the media range production allows that use, which it doesn't.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You remind me that we just talked about CI/CD. It could be interesting to say in a response, I accept any image media type, for example. That I believe would be an interesting use case, but still. Right.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the little.
Give it some time, Roy.
Give it a second.
Deep breath.
Yeah.
Go.
Something that Julian touched on is that the API world uses this stuff a lot more than the rest of the world, and quite frequently they use it in unwise ways, but ways that actually work for their use case. So I would hesitate to make any changes here other than editorial.
Yeah, so that's good input. Well, we got you on the line. I will broaden the question to something that's, I think, obviously implausible, but just if anyone, in the room, yourself or anyone in the physical room, has some implementation experience with just positive impacts of the Q values even without the star, and the relative complexity to the benefit they give. And this is the question anytime you do a priority scheme, right? If we just built something that is more unwieldy than it is beneficial. So this might be a good time to get a feel for how fundamental this is to our system, other than it being documented for 20 years.
Right. I really don't have any good use cases for this because I've always hated it. It's something that was kind of forced into the spec because the original CERN library implemented it in great detail. And so we've kept it in there. And in many cases, people have found ways to use it as particularly selecting a particular version of a media type for an API where they were doing API versioning based on the media type instead of some other mechanism. And then a lot of people know I hate that, but it was defined for a given purpose, and if they want to use it, it's fine with me if they use it that way. And I think of HTTP as a tool set for people to use, not as a opportunity for me to tell them what to do.
Well, I strongly suspect that the most we could do here is to just write some words saying that don't think you're getting what you're not getting from this, and cautioning misuse of it. But I'm curious, when you're talking about HTTP API use, are you just talking about content negotiation and perhaps key values, or are you talking about actually using the wildcard values in APIs? Because I haven't seen that too much.
I have, but they weren't. I'm not sure if they were in the subtype, subtype star values, or if it was just in the version field. So I can't remember if it was either one of those. But I have seen it used, but not. I don't think in the way that we formally approved.
Okay.
So I'm hearing this discussion point towards text that discourages this, but not deprecation. Does that match what you're hearing? Mark is nodding thoughtfully.
Well, text to explain the limitations and the appropriate uses, I think. I would note that, it seems like the browsers still send these sorts of things a fair amount, and maybe that's just a smaller discussion to be had amongst the browsers about sensible values to be sending. Which I know goes on.
I should note that the original use of this was when browsers had an external GIF viewer, an external image viewer, they would actually say image/star because they didn't know what the properties of the image viewer were. They would just send the raw data to the image viewer, and whether or not it supported a given image type was, who cared?
Okay. Maybe move on to number 44. Oh, Adam's got something.
Real quick from the Java room, Julian Reschke's proposing maybe this is something for BFC 56BIS.
BCP 56BIS?
Or what did I say?
BSP.
Oh yeah, BCP, sorry.
Maybe. I think we probably should write some text and then figure out where the best place for it is. Maybe. I think that the stuff when it's fundamental to the mechanisms that we define in HTTP, if we have advice about it, core is a place we should at least consider. But yeah, maybe. So number 44 is extension capabilities. We've talked about this a little bit before. We're seeing, I think I italicized, interesting use of extensions starting to be discussed. We had Patrick's WebSockets draft, which used an HTTP2 setting to override the semantics of an HTTP method, which is not specific to HTTP2. It's version generic, very specifically. And referring to pseudo headers as primary artifacts in HTTP header payloads in the signature payload proposal. So some guidance about the relationship of version-specific syntax extensions and top-level HTTP semantics would be helpful. I think that probably we need to come back with a proposal here, but I just wanted to see how much appetite there was in the working group for supporting this general idea that, some kinds of extensions are more appropriate for some things than others, and version independent extensions like methods. These are parts of the invariants of HTTP, effectively using the terminology we use in Quick, shouldn't be overridden by more specific versions unless there's special circumstances, which is kind of the way we ended up on your draft. Any comments about that?
So the connect specifically, I agree that it feels a little weird. I understand how we got there, and I'm wondering if maybe we could find appropriate wording for something like connect converts the transport to a carrier of some other tunnel, and then frame it as by default it's TCP, but extensions may specify how you pick something else.
So I think that's that's probably a separable issue. I can see, now that connect has so many different meanings, potentially many more, we should probably revisit its definition as a generic method. This is kind of the other side of, if I'm coming up with an HTTP2 extension, for example, a quick extension, it probably shouldn't modify the semantics of get, for example. That's not great.
Yeah. I almost wonder if there's room to say an extension can describe how some piece of the HTTP protocol behaves within a particular version.
You dropped off at the end there. Can you repeat that?
An extension could modify, an extension for a particular mapping could affect how that method is expressed in that mapping.
Sure, this goes back to layering, and the value of HTTP is that it works roughly the same from an application standpoint. It has certain properties from version to version, and as long as you don't violate that, that's fine. But how it gets expressed on the wire shouldn't matter at that layer. We need to find the right words here.
Right.
Yeah.
Martin Thompson, I'm not sure about Connect as an example that holds a lot of lessons for us in this.
I think it's an exception. So
I think it is sufficiently exceptional that trying to think of it as existing at the HTTP semantic layer is a mistake. And I think that's the conclusion we sort of came to in the discussions that we had. I tend to think that this is a difficult question because from many levels we are talking about the semantic layer in these documents and focusing our efforts there. And we're not really trying to do HTTP2 biz. That constrains what we can talk about really in this context a little bit, other than simply explaining more about what the intent was there. When we actually get to the point where we're actually defining new things or putting new constraints on it, that's where I get a little bit nervous about that.
I think you've given me an idea, and then Julian, I see you. I think we have yet to we have an open issue. We need to put some text in the semantics draft, I think, about the relationship to HTTP2. So what is the relationship to the core to HTTP2, just like we're factoring out HTTP1 into a separate document. Once we do that, then I think we can talk about the relationship of HTTP2 extensions to the generic semantics. So maybe we should just put a pin in this issue until that's done.
Yeah, that would be a good thing. I think there's probably a little bit more thinking to do on this front.
Right, and the way this issue is described, it's sort of pointed at specifically the H2 extension model, right? Not the core model for whatever its notion of extensions is. And that might actually be an interesting thing to define as well. Like that's not, I think, a sentence that appears in core anywhere. Like how to extend this. Like some things are defined as being generic, but the thought of what an extension means in a core concept versus a transport concept might be an interesting thing to write down.
The scope of applicability of a new header field, the scope of applicability of a new method, that sort of thing.
Well, we went to a pretty great length to talk about the nature of the extension points in BIS, but yeah, it didn't account for the fact that 2 was coming. I think part of this is part of the reason for this issue is the disruption that HTTP has a fairly constrained, the core level has a fairly constrained extension model, where HTTP2, as we know, is quite, shall we say, libertine. We do Julian and then you?
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go. In H2, we essentially have the story that if both sides agree on an extension, the extension can essentially modify anything. And that causes confusion if you want to compose different extensions, right? Because they might be in conflict about what they modify. I think what Patrick did for Connect and WebSockets is okay, because that was a very specific thing to get into the WebSockets mode, and there's no other thing that you would want to combine it with, but that's probably not true for other types of extensions.
Yeah, and I guess because we're talking a little bit about that draft, Connect is like a really interesting thing, right? Because it exists both as a core method and as a transport concept. So, that's going to be a tricky one.
So Roy Fielding from the Java room, extending a given name to have meaning where it never had meaning before might be okay. Changing its meaning in a context where it had meaning before should be forbidden in IETF loud.
Who's that from? I'm sorry.
Right.
Different channel.
So, Robert Thompson, I agree with what Roy said there. The other one that's a special snowflake is the PRI method. If you recall.
I think we have an issue to register that, actually.
It is registered. It's in the registry. I don't know whether it needs to go into these documents or not.
I think we have an open issue for that.
Okay. My point being that we reserved Connect in the registry, but it's really not a method.
And maybe we need to adjust its definition. Maybe we need a new issue to adjust its definition, like Mike was saying. I think the other thing to highlight here is that having the transport or the H2, for example, modify method semantics, for example, or source code, is by considering that HTTP is a hop-by-hop protocol, and if you have different hops on different versions or different transports, weird things are going to happen. You're going to have a bad time. So, okay. So I'm going to write in the issue. We've discussed this in Montreal, and there seems to be support for exploring this, but we should wait for the H2 text to appear in core first. Does that make sense?
I think the irony of all that with Connect and WebSockets is that what broke was the defined settings extension mechanism that we expect to work perfectly well.
Right. I know we probably need to revisit the definition of Connect too.
Yeah. Okay, so 42. We've got 12 minutes left.
Okay. Issue number 38. 3xx redirects. Excuse me. So, Anna noticed in Fetch that we really don't say much about when you follow a redirect, how do you form a request, the redirected request. And I think we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of application specifics left what happens here. But as I wrote here 20 days ago, perhaps the starting point would be to talk about how the HTTP defined headers and other protocol artifacts that we are in control of, we control the meaning of, are copied or not copied or modified when following a redirect, even if for someone they have to say it depends upon the application. And then knowing that, extensions, if they want to, extension headers or whatever, or methods they can define their own handling there. All I wanted to do here was to get a sense from folks whether it was reasonable to start exploring this space or whether people think this is a rat hole.
I think this is largely orthogonal in the sense that it's something we don't have to do, but at the same time, we have to, while the patient is on the table, it seems like a reasonable thing to do. We think it's important. I find the interleaving of these things a little annoying, but I sort of come accustomed to it.
You mean the different
the different protocols that this is used for. But you can sort of become accustomed to it, and in some ways it's nice to have them next to each other so that you know that you're not creating a header field with the same name and violently different semantics, which has happened. I don't know.
Which issue are you talking about, Martin? I think I know what issue you're talking about. It's not this one.
Copy modified with, sorry. You had the other one up on board. Sorry.
I took them in order and Mark started talking about this one. So
I just noticed sorry, wrong brain actually had another thing to say. 308's not in the draft. 308's not in the draft when we talked about rolling things in, and it seems like that.
No, that's yet another issue.
That's another issue?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. But that's fundamental to this, and I think it's probably worth.
So,
yeah.
so with respect to this one, I think some of the deviation you see in between implementations is that there was no guidance. And then some of the deviation is because, that's what they want for their application-specific behavior. But some guidance would be helpful. We've had a million bugs around this over the years and are doing a better job now. But the notion of what to copy and what not to copy is, I would appreciate at least taking a pass at to see if we can get consensus on. I don't know if how Brad's feeling over there on the Chrome team with this one. Is that a pain point?
Does anyone feel that we would want to diverge from what's in Fetch?
I don't think so. I think Fetch has done a lot of the hard work here. I think we just need to reflect it back. And I seem supportive of that too. He'd like to take, less responsibility for some of this stuff.
Sounds like a good plan.
Okay. All right, let's try and see how far we can get then. Sorry for going out of order.
Is it 42 you wanted to talk about?
No. Oh, I'm sorry. I did go out of order. Yeah, I forgot 42. Right. I skipped one. I'm so sorry. So right now, the header registry, way back when, I worked with Graham Klein and Jeff Mogul and a couple other folks to define the message header registry because it was not really a great thing before that. I don't think it existed before that. And we just made a decision at the time to combine mail and news and HTTP all into one big registry. And I know that some people get value out of being able to refer to that and see them side by side. But the registration context, semantic and syntactic requirements, lots of different things are fundamentally different for them. And I think from a user standpoint, it would be much better for the HTTP world if we just had a separate HTTP header registry. I think that would be incredibly valuable and actually get us better participation in the registry. So I had a draft that I put out a while back, but it didn't really, sorry. I had a draft a little while back that I...
Can you prove this?
Sorry?
Can you prove this statement that you made?
Well, apparently there's a teapot in orbit between Mars and So, no, that is not provable. But this is my opinion. I can prove that it is my opinion. I would be interested to hear if other people have a similar view of the world. I put out a draft a while back, as I was saying, to sketch out what this might look like. And it's listed in the bug if people are interested.
Patience on the table, as I said. I think this is potentially useful if the registration rules are sufficiently different. And so one thing that we might consider doing is making the process by which new entries are entered into this table a little smoother, because one of the things that I find is that this is a very small, not particularly well represented subset of the things that are actually out there. Wikipedia is a much better registry as it happens.
That's the problem.
And that is a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
And so that's, but if the registration procedures could be made a little more efficient, that would be ideal. And I don't think people working on HTTP need to bother with the NNTP stuff. So I'm sort of a little bit in support of this, but it is work. I'm sensitive to the fact that it's one of those things that can sort of drag on a little bit because registration procedures are often a little contentious and so on and so forth.
It's the draft that I put out is not just separate the registries, it's also talking about procedure. And I'm happy to just say that's a draft for the work group's consideration. I'm happy to put energy into it. Can we just consider adoption and see where we go? Knowing that the adoption does not mean a separate RFC, it means folding this approach into core when we're ready to say that that's what we want to do.
I might actually do a redirect override, and I would like to kick you to dispatch for this one.
You want to talk to dispatch about it?
Yeah, because it touches other.
Well, it doesn't touch so much as just pulls away from the flesh of the other ones, you know? Okay.
Besides, if you are suggesting to change the registration procedure, it might actually benefit the other
Of course.
branches.
Of course.
Which,
I'm of the opinion that the value that we get from having the registries together is dwarfed by the lack of value that is injected by having them together for other folks, for other uses.
Don't go adopting documents while I'm passing around blue sheets.
Damn it!
So I think we should take this as a core issue that we want to resolve, and if we get consensus, we would like to make this change, then we will add this to our wrestling match with the dispatch chairs. You've totally got Murray. I'm confident. Don't worry.
So I'm going to write that we discussed in Montreal. We need to take it to the list, and also talk to dispatch. Okay, we just have a few minutes left. Next up is, let's skip number 34 for the time being. We don't have enough time for that. Number 30, field name syntax. This is something that, again, may be too intrusive, but I just wanted to throw it out there. HTTP header field names actually are specified using token. And token is an incredibly permissive syntax. It uses a lot of weird characters, visible characters, but still characters, that I have never seen in real-world use. And I'm wondering, I don't think we can probably actually normatively change the syntax, but can we at least give some guidance about nice characters to use in header field names? Is that worth doing at this time? I heard someone in the room say, sure.
yeah, that was me. Why not? You're not changing anything. You're changing emphasis, right? I haven't seen anything outside of the ABNF you suggest. Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, Mike Bishop, my inclination would probably be all of these. If you comply to the new RFC, you're not allowed to generate these headers, but
You should still consume.
yeah, a peer could still send them to you and be legitimately complying to an old RFC. So we say if you're updated, you should make them. They can't go in the registry, and certainly we're not going to consume them in the client layer. Now the application above us might.
Okay.
So Roy comments that Apache HTTPD would prefer to reduce the syntax, and Julian points out that this could be done in a new registration procedure document.
Sure. I'm just going to say that there's interest in doing something here, and we'll take it to the list, I think.
Do you want to get in that comment? Or- No? Okay. And I think that brings us to the end. We go through a good chunk of issues there, maybe 12 or 15, right? Again, the editors here have done yeoman's work closing a whole slew of issues. This is the kind of project that could be done fairly uncontroversially, and we can get it done relatively quickly, or it could lie down forever. And the difference in that is you, because we're going to need reviewers and to get a good sense that there's actually consensus around this, and it's not just a small team making what really should be group-wide judgment calls. So I appreciate that they're doing all the heavy lifting, but I do want to make sure this thing gets read. And the way I will judge that is largely seeing discussion on issues as they come up on the list, and people that notice new things in the text. So please do make that happen if we want to get this done. But thank you. Thank you to all. And I think that's going to wrap us up for the day. Anything else? We're done.
Look at the issues list. We love comments. Thanks.
Where's my other blue sheet?
And I assume we're going to be meeting in Bangkok. Yeah, I'm assuming so. Just hoping.